Acts chapter 19, starting in verse 23. Let's go ahead and get a little bit of background. Paul, of course, we've been looking at Paul's time in Ephesus, and it feels like, because it's mostly been just in a couple of chapters, that, it's been a couple of weeks or something like that, or a couple of days. And that gives us the wrong impression. Acts is actually hard for us in this way, because the rhythm of Acts is, until you get to the last several chapters, kind of boom, 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 boom in terms of activity. It feels like it must be that way in time. And in truth, we've already covered decades. And in his time at Ephesus, we've already covered 3 years. Doesn't feel like that when you're reading this. Well, maybe it does. I don't know. But it's 3 years that he's at Ephesus. And that's why when we see later, we see him finally, we won't see this today, but when we see it later, we'll see him leave Ephesus. That's why his relationship with that church was so deep. It's why the elders and the people that were there were in tears when Paul left, and also because of what they knew he was going to face. But it's why that relationship was so deep. This was not a fly-by-night, short-term mission trip. He was there for years, and we kind of have to keep that in our minds as we look at the events we're going to look at today, because this didn't happen after a week of Paul teaching. This happened after years of Paul teaching, Apollos teaching, other members in the church like Priscilla and Aquila, those people teaching and preaching and sharing the gospel. Much more going on here than what we see just in these few pages. I think it's important for us to remember that. Verse 23, about the time Paul decides he wants to go to Jerusalem, before he gets to leave town, about that time, there arose a great disturbance about the way. We don't talk about the church that way anymore, because that sounds, in our modern vernacular, calling something the way either sounds like you're trying to be too trendy or you're a cult, right? And we don't call it that anymore. But at the time, they sometimes called Christianity just the way, because it is a way of life, a way of being that is not just something you do. It's not just some place you attend. You don't just go to church. It is a whole new way of being human. And so that was how they often referred to it. And you'll notice in a lot of the English translations, it's capitalized because it was that important to them and ought to be to us. Verse 24, a silversmith named Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, also the goddess Diana, brought in a lot of business for the craftsmen there. He called them together along with the workers in related trades and said, my friends, that we receive a good income from this business. And you see and hear how this fellow Paul is convinced and led astray large numbers of people here in Ephesus and in practically the whole province of Asia. He says that gods made by human hands are no gods at all. And it almost has, that scene, what is that musical? Because I've never actually seen it. I've only seen this one scene from it. Isn't there something about a candy shop or a railroad? I have no idea. Where he starts talking about, that there's big trouble, and he tries to get the town excited about all this big trouble. And you know what happens? And every time this little plot is used in a movie or a musical or something like that, someone eventually goes, and the children, he's leading astray the children. You almost expect Demetrius to say, he's hurting our business, he's insulting our God, and he's leading our children astray. Not the children! Oh, that was good. I didn't mean to do that, but that works. Not the children, because that's how we kind of alarm people the most, right? Oh, no, not the children. They're gonna be teaching the gospel in the schools. Oh, no! And so then it just becomes this big fear-mongering brouhaha, right? And this is what Demetrius does. This is what troublemakers do. This is what manipulators do. This is what the scared do. This is what the weak do. This is what the cowards do. They whisper, they campaign, they gripe behind the scenes. Sometimes they get enough of their following that they start to get people to rally behind them and say, yeah, let's not do that. And this is what's happening here. This is important for us because it's not just the idolaters who do this, is it? We are Demetrius. I was thinking, I didn't tell Curly exactly the angle that I'm taking with this. When you led the battle belongs to the Lord. Well, I sort of did. I signaled it with the song we're going to sing here in a little while. The battle belongs to the Lord. It belongs to the Lord, and in part the reason the battle belongs to the Lord is because often the battle is not against the world around us, it's against the world within us. And that's actually the biggest problem we see at Ephesus. It's the biggest problem we see in our world today. It's the biggest problem we see in the church today. It's the battle within us. So we're going to look at this, like I often do. We're going to look at it from a different angle. We're not going to look at it as us versus the world this morning. We're going to look at this Scripture as we approach all of Scripture, as James, the book of James, tells us, as a mirror. You don't look in the mirror to see other people. You look in the mirror to examine yourself. So I'm going to challenge you as we look at why they react the way they do, to ask yourself, do I react that way? Have I been Demetrius, or have I been the people manipulated by Demetrius? The answer, by the way, will be for every human being, yes. The question is always, will I be honest with what I see? That's the challenge from the book of James. When you look in the mirror, do not merely be hearers only. Be doers of the word. So that it's not as if you looked in the mirror of the Word, saw your image, and then as you walked away, you forgot all about it. Oh, well, that was nice. And you forget the change that needs to happen and the challenge that Jesus puts to your heart and the Spirit puts to conviction in your spirit. So that's how we want to look at this today. Well, that's how I want to look at this. You're sitting there going, oh, I don't want to do any of that. But, that's how we're going to look at it today. It goes on. He goes on with the crowd, Demetrius does. There is danger. Okay, isn't that how it often works? There's danger. There is danger. Not only that our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited. And the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. We've co-opted that argument from time to time, haven't we? When they heard this, they were furious and began shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" Soon the whole city was in an uproar, and the people seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia, and all of them rushed into the theater together. And Paul wanted to appear before the crowd, but the disciples would not let him. Even some of the officials of the province, friends of Paul, sent him a message begging him not to venture into the theater. Okay, let's stop here for a second and talk a little bit about what's going on. So you've got Demetrius, who is a silversmith, particularly to do with, but I bet he's not exclusive, particularly to do with what is popular at Ephesus, and that is the temple devoted to Artemis, or the goddess Diana, depending on your translation. It goes by both names. Did I skip a slide? I feel I skipped. I did not skip. I just misplaced them. Let's go here first. You're sitting there going, is that what Artemis of the Ephesians look like? I've seen that before, right? That was probably throwing you off a little bit. But this temple devoted to Artemis used to stand. Now it's nothing but, a little bit of rubble and a platform, a foundation. But it was a major, major temple in the city. It was the dominant part of the city of Ephesus. And it was a pagan, prostitute-ridden fertility cult there at Ephesus. And so he made a lot of money. When you have idols, you make a lot of money selling those idols and fertility idols and things like that in the marketplace. And he was a silversmith, so he's making them out of silver at least. And that's what he did. And he made a lot of money off of that. And you can see why he and the other people like him in his trade would sit there and go, well, but if everybody starts worshiping an invisible God, how am I supposed to work with that? Right? If you are an idol maker, and now people are turning to a God who is not an idol, but is a real, true, living God and spiritual being, who himself has said, don't you dare be making idols of me, you got to find more work. And I'm going to assume that in first century Ephesus, souvenir spoons like you get, the same one with a little different picture in the end of the spoon, souvenir spoons just weren't enough to support a silversmith in Ephesus, I guess. And so he's worried, they're going to bring shame to our job, which is interesting. Because this means that Demetrius knows enough about what they're teaching and about what the gospel really means, that he knows it's a threat to who he is. He knows it's a threat to what he does. He understands that idolatry is not a part of Christianity. That's just a side note, but I think it's really good when we see that the worldly people in that city knew and understood enough, not a lot maybe, but they understood enough to understand what needed to end in the life of a Christian and what a Christian ought to abandon. Sometimes, now, there are times where the world knows enough of who Jesus is and enough of what Jesus taught and how Jesus lived that they actually look at us when we're not living like that, talking like that, serving like that, blessing like that, that they look at us and go, "But I thought you said you followed Jesus." It's not bad when the world knows enough to convict us. It's bad when they need to. We live in a time where often the world has needed to convict us. That's actually not unusual, but it's sad every time it happens. The book of Habakkuk is a book about that in the Old Testament, where God comes to the prophet Habakkuk and tells him about his plans to judge the people of God for their idolatry, for their selfishness, for their refusal to live as they were called to live, as a city on a hill and a light to the world. And at first, Habakkuk is all for it, because he's frustrated with the ungodliness of people who were supposed to be God's people. And he's frustrated. And he's like, "God, what are you going to do about it?" And God says, "Well, I'm going to use the Babylonians." And then Habakkuk goes, wait a minute, but they're worse than us. You can't use people worse than us. Remember I said last week that the weakness of a leader is when he will only listen to people who have a more prominent position than his or her own. That lacks humility, that it lacks perspective, that it lacks the character that God wants in us. Same with us. Habakkuk has a struggle with relative righteousness. Yes, we're bad, but we're not as bad as them, so you can't use them to judge us. I think many people in our world, in the church today, maybe many people in this room, if God said, "I am going to use X," whatever group of people, to discipline the church of Christ, to show them that some of their attitudes have gone wrong, we would bow up just like Habakkuk. We might even bow up like Demetrius. Say, "You can't use those people." But we have our ways, and we have our past, and we have our DNA, and we have our tradition, and we have. That's not the way we do things, or that's not the way I think. That's not what my grandpa said, or that's not what the guy who taught me the gospel and then baptized, that's not what he said. And all of that's irrelevant if we're wrong, isn't it? All of it's irrelevant if our character isn't where it belongs, isn't it? But we have a hard time with that, because we're more like Demetrius and the people shouting than we may want to admit. I'm going to go back a picture. You got a sneak peek. The old game Operation. This is the newest version, I guess, of that. They've updated the guy a little bit. He has more hair than he used to, doesn't he? And shorts. I think we're all grateful that now he has shorts. But this is the guy from Operation. And you know that game. Probably everybody here has played it at some time or another, yourself or with your grandkids. I played it as a child. Haven't played it in a very long time. I don't think we have it. But you get the tweezers, and all that's connected, and it completes a circuit. And if you accidentally hit that little metal boundary around whatever it is you're trying to remove during the surgery, it buzzes at you, and the nose lights up. And the idea of the game is you just hurt this person, and if you do this enough, you kill the guy, right? You don't want to do that, and that's how you lose the game. And so the challenge is, the delicate surgery of getting those pieces out. The gospel and sharing the gospel, teaching the gospel, putting it into action is often like a game of Operation. And when you have stepped into somebody's little area of sparkitude and it goes, right? Because I could probably point out almost everybody in this room. I could point out something that would be your I'm not going to, and I don't have it in my outline, so you just settle down. But we all, every one of us, we have those, right? More often, I think of it in terms of a minefield. Some people have more mines in their field than others, don't they? But we all have them, and they all, you'll notice up there, I've labeled some of these for the purpose of looking at Acts 19. We all have some that are fairly universal, that are not necessarily mines all the time until we become triggered. You know, that's a term, I don't remember ever hearing this until about 20 years ago. And now we talk about people who are easily triggered all the time. You know our mistake in talking about people who are easily triggered? We think it's only other people, don't we? We all have our stuff. And we all have somebody in our life who knows where those triggers are, don't we? And they know how to push them. And it's not, some people do that intentionally. Some people don't. We kind of assume that everybody who pushes our button pushed it on purpose. It's not real true, but we kind of assume that. We actually ruin a lot of relationships assuming that they were talking about us or that it was on purpose or whatever. And we get triggered and we get angry and we all over people, right? Just all over people. The ones that they dealt with are all labeled up here. You look at what Demetrius says. He starts off with the one about money, doesn't he? He says back in verse 25, he called them together and along with the workers in related trades and said, you know, my friends, we receive a good income from the business. Oh, you done messed with somebody's money. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I want you to ask yourself, is this one of yours? Are you extra sensitive when somebody affects your money? Oh, no, they didn't. Whether it is that they are trying to, maybe it's something, maybe an elder gets up and says, you know, we really need to see more giving in this. And you go, brother, I don't want you talking about my wallet now. Some people, they're triggered. Can I tell you something? If you're easily triggered about that, you have a lot in common with Demetrius, because idolatry still happens. And maybe yours is not idolatry, maybe it's fear. Some people are very insecure, and so they're very sensitive about it because they're insecure. And that's a different issue. That's not necessarily a sin-rooted issue. It's a character issue, and it's something you need to learn to trust the Lord, and you need to leave that in His hands more. But, you know, we get where that comes from. But for some, it's about control. We want to say that, you know, I am yours, Lord, everything I am. You know that song, I'm yours, Lord, everything I am, everything I've got. I might have gotten those backwards, I don't know. Anyway, everything I'm not. I'm yours, Lord. And we sing it around the campfire, you know. That's where we sing, you know, a hard-fighting soldier and things like that. But then somebody says, yeah, and the Lord would like for you to do this with it. Not in a manipulative way, not in a crooked way, not a slimy TV preacher. But we're convicted and we go, no, you ain't touch it. No, Lord. When I said everything I got, I meant that broken down old car that's in my backyard that has mesquite growing through the hood. I didn't mean my car payment, Lord. Oh. We all have these triggers, don't we? Scripture tells us that greed, just greed, gimme, mine, don't you touch it, greed, is idolatry. Just like what Demetrius was a part of. That's idolatry. So there's money, and then there's pride. They're going to ruin our good name. Did you hear what he said? They're going to ruin our good name. Which is kind of funny. Dude, you're an idol maker. I'm not sure how good your name is. But okay, we're judging this by different standards. Definitely. Different worldviews. They're going to ruin our good name. Well, Paul isn't actually out to ruin the fact that you have skills. The gospel is going to change what you use those skills for. Are we willing when we become Christians? Are we willing as we grow in our faith to let God transform our vocations into something that was just about us, into something that is also honoring to Him? I mean, the guy could have made a good living. honorably in the sight of God. But that's my pride. I do this. People know me for this. If I have to change it, what are people going to know me for? That's our pride and our identity. But I've always been. Yeah? That's why you need Jesus, right? You ever wonder how Jesus hears these things when we say things like, well, but that's just the way I am. That's who I am. That's how people know me. I can't let you change that, God. Everybody knows me as... You ever wonder if He doesn't want to just say back to us, I know that's what people know you as. I had to die for that. Can we do better? Can we let the Spirit transform us into something better than what we've always been known as? Better than what we identify as? Sometimes God shakes our identity, and our hearts get triggered. Our ego gets triggered. Our pride gets triggered. And we resist Him. And that's what's happening with Demetrius. He's not yet seen what could my life be in Christ if. He only sees, why do you think you have to change this? And why do you think I have to change that? And why do I have to do this? And how come this? And how come that? And why? I like the way that I am. We all like the way that we are. Sometimes we like things that Jesus says need to change. Sometimes we like things in a certain way that Jesus needs us to change for the sake of the world around us, and sometimes even for our own souls. He then appeals to them on two other bases. Things. I like things. That works better, right? Conformity. The push to be part of the mob. If your parents did their job, if your grandparents have done their job, then they taught you well, never go with the mob. Never go with the crowd. You stop, you think, you evaluate, and if you need to get out, you get out. Wise parents teach these things. Okay, I'm not even getting into current stories in the news, but if you want to apply that to current stories in the news, wise people do not pretend that the mob knows what it's doing or that getting a counter mob is the way to go. We need to hear this, church, because I see Christians getting sucked into mobs every single day. We want to think that it's just the Ephesian idolaters, right? We want to think that, but that is us fooling ourselves. There are Christians who have picked a side in an argument that is not theirs to pick a side of. We have Christians who have gotten so wrapped up in the battles of this world that they actually will ask stupid questions, and it is, okay? I know some of you don't like that word, but sometimes it's in the Bible and it fits. We will have the foolish, proverbial foolish notion that when somebody says, as Christians, maybe we shouldn't even be part of this particular political argument or cultural argument or culture war. And a Christian will foolishly say, but how can I not be part of that argument? How can I not get involved with that? Aren't I supposed to stand up for Jesus? That's what I'm going to do. You don't stand up for Jesus when you become a part of the division of the world. There's a big fat period right there. Underline it, highlight it, let it eat at you. Our world is ripping itself apart. And a Christian who participates is a Christian who doesn't know the gospel and who isn't following Jesus. I know that's stern. I know that's hard. but it's the truth. Demetrius knew it. It scared him. Does it scare you? Does it scare you to think that you may have to stand apart from your neighbors, even Christian neighbors, and simply not accept an invitation to a worldly fight? Does that scare you? But then how else are we going to, I don't know, we could follow Jesus. We could try it His way. Instead of the arguing, instead of the bickering, instead of the complaining and the griping, because, all of that is actually on His list of don'ts. We could love. We could serve. We can humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord. And what was the promise of that? Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up. You mean we don't get there through fights? No. I've seen fights destroy churches. I've seen fights destroy communities. And I've seen that fighting, bitter spirit destroy people's faith. I have never seen it grow a church. I've never seen people out in the world say, you know what I'd like to be a part of? I'd like to be a part of a bunch of gripey old backbiters. That sounds good. Really? I mean, there's a reason churches don't put that in their pamphlet, right? On their website. Come over here. We got the best complainers in the county. Oh, thanks for the warning. Woo-hoo, I'm out of there. If you've ever served in ministry or you've ever had a reason to look at ministry opening positions, you see some of those churches sound exciting. They're on fire. They want to reach their community. They want to serve their community. And you look at that and you go, man, that looks like a great place to go. And then there are some, a friend of mine was talking about this the other day. He said he was looking at one and it just looked like a warning sign. Everything in there. You could tell the fights they were having by the things they didn't want in their next preacher. Right? And it didn't really say much about their last preacher. It said a lot about what that next preacher is going to deal with. That boy better run. Don't you send your name there. You can read those things. It's like Braille. You go, I see. And you learn about that stuff. When Christians reflect something other than Christ, we lose. Anything other than Christ, we lose. So why do we keep trying to reflect something else? Demetrius starts gathering people to his cause, and that's what people do when they're scared, angry, prideful. They start recruiting to their cause. You can always tell when people are doing this, when it's out of those things, out of a bruised ego, out of an un-Christ-like spirit, because first of all, it's always going to be negative. Secondly, it's usually going to start behind the scenes because, and this was in a leadership podcast the other day, some leaders, not all church leaders, these were a mix of different kinds of leaders. They were talking about different things that they run into in their jobs and everything else. And they said something that really struck me because it was a very astute observation. It's true. Hadn't really thought about it this way, but they're right. Cowards complain to cowards. Cowards complain to cowards. What I mean by that, or what they meant by that, is if you are a leader, and this is whether you're at your job, you may be working in schools, or you may be working in churches, or you may be working at the university, wherever. We all deal with these things, okay? Just different, little bit different spin, a little different variation on the theme, but you deal with this stuff in all different kinds of workplaces. Sometimes you deal with this stuff in families. But he says, what he meant by that, cowards complain to cowards, is there's always one or two people in any organization, church, that it seems like they just hear nothing but complaints. A lot of times it's an elder. Just hears nothing but complaints. And they get really tired of it. They really worn out by it. Okay? And by the way, let me just stop, put a pin in this, and just cease a little bit of worry. I'm not talking about anything particular here right now. If it sounds like that, that's not the case. But this is just true. People will start complaining to a particular leader, elder, deacon, whatever, and just complain to them all the time. All the time, all the time, all the time. It's all they ever do. They just complain all the time. And the same group of people, every time they see them, come here, I got something to tell you. And it just becomes this thing. And it is so life-sucking. You know? It's like that machine in The Princess Bride where you suck out the ears. And that's what happens to the leader in those particular moments. And it's hard for them. Why does one always get that? Their point was because that leader doesn't have the courage to tell them to knock it off. That leader doesn't have the courage to say to those people, oh, you want to talk to me about so-and-so? And what did they say when you talked to them? You say that 3 or 4 times and they ain't coming back to you. Because cowards only complain to the people they know are too cowardly to stop hearing the complaints. If you had the courage to address legitimate complaints well, but illegitimate, calling them what they are, and teaching people not to do that, you know you don't get that many complaints, they're going to go find a coward. But hey, at least your time is a little bit easier on this planet. That's what they do. That's what we do. And that's what Demetrius did. He manipulates people. He gets them scared because he appeals to their ego, to their money, to their livelihood, to their identity, to their. And he just goes, Don't you want to beat up Paul? And they all go, yeah! Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Probably some of those people in the crowd didn't even really believe in Artemis. But he's got them all riled up. Yeah! You know, just like a bunch of fools at a church did the other day. Being very ungodly, being very violent, being very worldly, and pretending to follow Jesus. And that is pretending because Jesus wasn't there. Because Jesus has no part of those things and wouldn't have said what they said. Maybe you've said it too. I got one. There you go. They all rush over to the Colosseum, the amphitheater there. Big place, isn't it? Imagine being Paul walking up the road here to go there, filled with tens of thousands of people, all shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Down with Paul!" And Paul looks at that and says, y'all want to let me go talk to these people? What are you, nuts, Paul? Maybe a little. Maybe a little. Paul wants to rush in. What we learn in this moment, Paul, human, sometimes thought he could bite off more than he was going to be able to chew. You ever feel that way? I think we all do, don't we? Whenever that kind of a ridiculous scene is being made, don't you want to go fix it right then? Don't you want to just walk in there and tell them all, you just all be quiet and let me talk to you for a minute? Don't you feel like that sometimes? I feel like that. I didn't mean to use my dad voice on you, but that's not my dad voice. But you know, don't you sometimes feel like that? You just want to go in there and say, hush. He wanted to address it. He thought maybe there was an opportunity. The disciples go, Paul, no. Sometimes you don't fight fire with fire, Paul. Sometimes it's best to just let the fools be fools. That's biblical, you know. I read that somewhere. I'll tell you about it in a minute. Let's go here. Looking at ourselves, not other people. Looking at ourselves, not other people. What are your triggers? If you were looking at that list earlier, what are yours? All of them? Maybe. I mean, all of them can get us at some time or another. What have you found yourself triggered by lately? Lately, like in the last 5 minutes. What are your triggers? Be very aware that Satan is looking to exploit them. He will do that through our world around us. Sometimes he'll do it through a brother or a sister. You know, cowards who complain to cowards, they go and they gripe and they chew, and that spreads so much faster than good news, doesn't it? We have some great things going on. Every now and then we have somebody who just decides to get a bee in their bonnet, and they try to recruit. Don't be recruited to the negativity. Follow Jesus, who will lead you away from that every time. I mentioned this earlier. Your grandfather was right. Never be part of the mob. Stand apart and pray. The disciples had to talk Paul into that. He didn't want to go be part of the mob, but he wanted to try and take it on. And sometimes you need to know that's not the thing to do either. Sometimes you just need to let that fire burn itself out. You need to be somebody who doesn't just throw fuel on it. And then this one, the disciples, when they come to him and they tell him, no, Paul. They tell him, you can't talk reason to unreasonable people. There'll be another time. And they had them. Because for years he had had them day in, day out in the marketplace. He had had them at the synagogue. And those were going to continue. He was going to have opportunities to talk to some of those people face to face who were in that crowd. And that's always going to be better than if you try to just take on a mob. Right? It's always going to be more effective. It's going to be better. Trust the Lord. Trust the process. Go and just wait and talk to these people later, Paul. They were right about that. And we need to remember that sometimes too. And we need to remember this. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be like him. You don't fight fire with fire. If the world is screaming, we will not help anyone by screaming too. If the world is fighting, we will not help anyone by becoming a bunch of fighters too. But speaking peace, showing love, and being Jesus, that's our long game. Be patient. Work the long game. Patience works. He was there for years. He left a strong church when he went that had an impact to this day. We're reading about them. We read earlier about them later, and we need to remember that we win the long game every single time. Where is the temple of Artemis? Where's the first Artemis church of early? Where is that? Yeah, but look how many Christians are in this town. Be humble. Trust the Lord and let Him work change in your life. Don't let pride bow you up so that you start a riot instead of starting a revival. Because we're going to start one or the other. You can have a riot or you can have a revival, but you ain't getting both. Okay? They went on and lived out faithfully the gospel, but that takes constant decision to do. So you can say, well, I've been a Christian for 30 years, I don't need to know this. Yes, you do, because the church at Ephesus did 30 years later too. John, the apostle, has to write on behalf of Jesus Christ himself, and in Revelation 2, verses 4 to 5, he says, but I do have this problem with you, church at Ephesus. This is Jesus talking. I do have this problem with you, church at Ephesus. You've forgotten your first love. Remember when you used to love to serve your community? And now you retreat from your community? Remember when you used to say yes and now you say no? Remember when you used to encourage but now you complain? Remember when you? You just go back and do it like you did at the beginning. Be an on-fire Christian again. You go, well, I don't know how to do that. Do it. Make the decision. Tomorrow when I get up, I'm going to love the Lord my God with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love my neighbor as myself. Tomorrow, when somebody says, hey, could you help me? I'm going to say yes. Tomorrow, when somebody just hits my trigger, I'm going to remember my 1911. Guys in the room know what I'm talking about. You know what a 1911 is? That's a 45. Colt 45 is model 1911. It was invented in 1911. I'm going to remember my 1911. You're like, that's not what you've been preaching all morning long, James. What are you doing? Here is Proverbs 19:11. It is to a man's glory to overlook an offense. It is to a man or a woman to their glory to overlook an offense. not being triggered, not drawing the wrong 1911. Maybe you need to have Proverbs 19:11 engraved on the slide of that pistol. That might be a good idea, right? Remember who you are and whose you are, and go back to your first love. That is when we will change the world. And we may, in that process, run into a few Demetrius guys. We may run into a few people who get angry because they feel triggered. Don't take, this is the one time I'm going to say this, don't take Paul's advice and rush into the theater. Take the advice of the disciples, the people who would become the elders in that church there. Live to fight another day. But when that other day comes, love, serve, be Jesus to those people. Yeah, maybe they react wrong. We won't fix it by reacting equally wrongly. If they react wrong, pray for them. Be patient. Be calm. Be creative in the ways that you share the gospel with them. And be humble. When we do that, we start to change our world for the better. But the change starts with us. If you need a change this morning, we will pray with you. If you need to be completely changed to a new creation, being baptized into Christ because of your faith in the Son of God, if you need to put that change into your life, being buried with Him and raised to a new life that looks more like Jesus and less like the crowd, we want to give that invitation to you this morning. You can come down forward and we will be thrilled to see you start that change and see God start that change in your life. Let's stand and sing.